Sir Keir Starmer is in power. Labour are in power after a 14-year Conservative government. But what's this mean for renters and landlords? Should landlords be worried? Should renters be worried? In this video, I'm going to walk you through the facts so you can decide for yourself. And in case you don't know me, my name is Gale, and the reason this is all so important to me is I've spent over 10 years now building a UK-wide home buying company, British Home Buyers, nationwide estate agency, and my own personal property portfolio. So not only does that give me a bit of insider knowledge, but also making sure I read the market correctly is essential to mine and my clients' success. So let's get into it. I've broken each of Labour's policies into 3 sections. So 1, what did Labour declare they would do? 2, what effect will these things have directly on the property market? And then 3, my personal opinion. So let's get into it. What did Labour declare they would do? I've been through Labour's manifesto in detail, and I'll link it in the description below so you can take a look if you want. And from the manifesto and what they've also publicly mentioned, I've come across 6 key things that I think will impact the property market, potentially significantly. Number 1, Labour will cap corporation tax. Labour will cap corporation tax at the current level of 25%, the lowest in the G7 for the entire Parliament, and will act if tax changes in other countries pose a risk to UK competitiveness. The reason corporation tax is going to be so important to a lot of landlords is because of Section 24. In short, Section 24 was rolled out from 2017 and came into full effect in April 2020. What it stopped was landlords being able to deduct all their mortgage interest as a cost, which would then reduce their tax bill. But there is a way to get around Section 24, which is to buy properties through a limited company, not in your personal name. So, of course, in a limited company, you instead pay corporation tax on your profits and then can choose to pay yourself through dividends or a salary, essentially bypassing the effects of Section 24. As you can imagine, there has been an ever-growing number of landlords setting up companies to hold buy-to-let properties. But that now makes corporation tax a key consideration for landlords. Now, of course, it sounds great that Labour are capping corporation tax at the current rate of 25%. But as you can see here, it is the highest rate we've seen since 2011. Now, Labour make the point that despite this, it's the lowest rate in the G7. Is that true? Well, it is true. You can see pre the increase to 25%, it was significantly lower. And even at 25%, it's still far lower than other G7 countries. Even if you look back at our corporation tax rates since the 80s, we have seen rates far higher. Perhaps our tax rate should be in line with other G7 countries. Maybe that's why it feels like everything is falling apart. What do you think? Anyway, what effect will this have on the property market? As we all know, corporation tax affects all UK companies, not just landlords structuring their portfolio in this way. But the direct effect is it reduces the company's after-tax profits and therefore the return to company shareholders. So in effect, it's going to reduce the money that they can take as dividends or income or reinvest to grow their business by buying more buy-to-let properties, for example. My personal opinion on this is I think in general, I don't think this will have a big effect on landlords, specifically because the 25% tax rate only applies to profits above £250,000. If your profit is £50,000 or less, then the rate is still 19% anyway, the old rate, and any profit between is tapered between 19 and 25%. So I think most landlords aren't going to see significant differences to warrant exiting the market altogether. I think in general, Labour pledging they will cap the rate at least means we've all got that stability in knowing they hopefully shouldn't increase over the next Parliament. The second thing Labour has pledged is, number 2, to get Britain building again. To me, this is the big important pledge, but before I get into it, if you found this video useful, please subscribe or at the very least like the video. It really helps keep me motivated to keep making these for you. Anyway, let's get back into it. In short, Labour want to build 1.5 million homes over the next Parliament. So they want to build 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years. That works out at 300,000 homes a year. So it doesn't mean they'll build 300,000 next year. It might start at 200, but they want to end at 1.5. So look, if that's achieved, that would be amazing, because as you can see, every government this century has failed miserably at achieving the same government target of 300,000 homes a year. In fact, even if you go back in time, you have to head all the way back to the 60s when we last saw that many homes being built, despite the fact we now have a far, far larger population. In fact, you can see from the graph that the building of property seems to have collapsed from the 80s onwards. And do you want to know why? Margaret Thatcher. No disrespect to the late Margaret Thatcher, I actually quite like her, but leading up to the 80s, almost a third of homes were affordable social housing, whereas now it is a fraction of that. The reason that's a problem is because social housing created a really decent alternative to home ownership, and more importantly was a massive competitor to the buy-to-let property market. The moment the Thatcher government turbocharged the right to buy for social housing, allowing anyone living in social housing to buy their council housing at a reduced rate, a discount, that dramatically decreased the amount of council homes. And at the exact same time, the government reduced the housing it was building. So we just weren't building enough to replace all those homes being sold. The government was basically downsizing its property portfolio, which was the biggest competitor to private landlords, and at the exact same time reduced what it was building concurrently. The reasons I'm explaining all this is because this is what triggered the downturn in house building and the skyrocketing of property prices since. This was an inflection point where private landlords started becoming a bigger and bigger part of the property market. And it appears Labour wants to try and reverse this. So not only are Labour going to build way more homes through all the obvious ways like improving the planning system and so on, but they want to deliver the biggest increase in social and affordable house building in a generation. They want to rebuild what the Thatcher government essentially sold off. But importantly, and I'm quoting the manifesto again here, Labour will prioritise the building of new social rented homes and better protect our existing stock by reviewing the increased right to buy discounts introduced in 2012 and increasing protections on newly built social housing. So again, you can see Labour really trying to reverse the damage by increasing the volume of homes being built, but more importantly, growing and protecting the volume of social housing that helps stabilise property prices and rents in general across the market. So what effect will this have on the property market, and what's my opinion on it? Look, if Labour pulls this off, this will be monumental for the property market. We've not hit house building targets since the 60s, and look where it's got us. I'm conflicted in a way because morally, I'm convinced this plan of increasing home building and in particular, growing and protecting social housing is essential for equality across the UK. However, if Labour pull this off, it will slow house price growth, reduce rental yields, all of which is a good thing for society, but a bad thing for landlords. I really desperately hope Labour achieve this, but part of me feels convinced we're going to be let down as usual. Number 3, Labour will increase stamp duty paid by non-UK residents. You may not be aware, but non-UK residents actually pay different stamp duty rates to UK-based residents and investors alike. So as you can see, the left column shows standard stamp duty rates, although at the moment that 2% stamp duty has been scrapped temporarily and it's unclear if Labour will reinstate it. But you can see on the right-hand side how much higher stamp duty is for non-UK residents. Labour have said they're going to increase these levels to focus on giving UK residents an even bigger advantage over overseas buyers. So what effect will this have on the property market, and what's my view of it? In reality, I think this policy is a headline because Although I do personally think it's a great idea, it will reduce the competition for everyone here in the UK, that will help all types of UK buyers. It's not going to have as big of an effect on the overall market as I think the majority of people think it will have, because right now less than 3% of London homes are owned by non-UK residents or companies. About 105,000 properties. Across England and Wales, there are 270,000 homes owned by overseas owners or companies, which equates to about 1% of all properties. So look, it's a good policy to try and reduce that to 0.5%, for instance, but I don't think it's going to move the house price needle overall. Number 4, reforming private renting. The Conservatives' Renters Reform Bill obviously came to nothing, as it was scrapped the moment Rishi Sunak called the election. However, Labour had already shared significant doubts around the version of the bill that was introduced anyway. Instead, Labour has promised a renters' charter which would offer the following: an end to Section 21 no-fault evictions, the right for renters to have pets, the right to make reasonable alterations to a property as a renter, to introduce a 4-month notice period for landlords, and finally, to bring an end to automatic evictions for rent arrears. So what effect will this have on the market? Look, it's going to make the market far, far better for renters, but at the same time, it's going to increase the risk to landlords. For instance, if I can't easily evict a tenant for not paying rent, that's going to increase my risk, and therefore I'm going to need to increase rents to offset it. Or if a tenant wants to make a reasonable alteration to a property I disagree with, and then have to reverse what they've done when they move out, that then adds to my costs. So that's all either going to increase the tenant's costs or decrease the landlord's profits. In the round, these are all sensible changes, but it is of course going to make things more difficult for landlords that may then choose to exit the market. We've already been seeing this happen, which is why rents have been increasing so much. However, the key here is if Labour can build the homes they promise, then that will help offset that anyway. So overall, a good thing. Number 5, introducing rent controls. In the past, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan, Manchester's Mayor Andy Burnham, as well as others, were calling for rent freezes in some major cities. However, in June 2023, Labour completely scrapped its pledge to bring in rent control. So I guess that could obviously change, but generally rent controls in other cities abroad have seen mixed results. And so if this is ever considered in the future, it needs to be carefully thought out. It's actually the detail behind the rent controls that actually really matters to if it works or not. Number 6, helping first-time buyers. The Labour Party released data that showed 2/3 of children born in 2023 won't own a home before they are 50, which I find particularly horrifying given I have 2 children under 3 right now. So what Labour want to do is introduce a mortgage guarantee scheme for first-time buyers. So essentially, the government would act as a guarantor for part of your loan, which then encourages lenders to offer low deposit deals that then makes it easier for people to get onto the property ladder to begin with. Now, this sort of thing already exists where you might get a parent to act as a guarantor on your mortgage, which then reduces the risk to the lender and then means that you can usually get better interest rates, for example, helping you borrow more. So look, like how the Help to Buy schemes in the past significantly helped people buy new builds, this will help any first-time buyer buy any property, which will really help the market in general. Because even if you're not a first-time buyer, it creates transactions at the bottom of the ladder that then creates the transactions up the ladder, which helps everyone who's trying to sort of upsize or downside, for instance. It helps the whole property market. And finally, number 7, regulating holiday homes and short-term lets. This is a big one because the rise of Airbnb and Booking.com has dramatically increased the amount of property being used for holiday lets. Added to that, if you rent a property as a holiday let, it also bypasses a landlord's issues with Section 24, as you can set off interest payments against costs on a property you own as an individual and rent as a holiday let specifically. You don't get that if it's a normal rental property. Labour have previously mentioned they will surface a similar concept to the licensing scheme in Wales for short-term lets. So in short, in England, it would require any accommodation used for short-term lets to be registered and licensed, similar to the process that exists for HMOs in many areas already. At this stage, we don't really know the severity of any rule changes, the detail behind it, but again, anything that constrains the supply of holiday lets is going to help homeowners and hurt landlords. I think in general here, Labour are being quite sensible about everything they're announcing. I just hope they keep their promise on those 1.5 million homes, because that is really what matters. What do you think to all of this? Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video up here.